What kind of man buys the worst house on the richest street, pays cash, moves in with a little girl and a few cardboard boxes, and never once opens the curtains? The neighbors in Maplerest Estates had theories. The HOA had lawyers. The police had already been called, but not one of them stopped to wonder why his 7-year-old daughter held the same wooden box every single day, or why behind the walls they wanted him to fix he was carefully uncovering something that had been buried for 20 years. They thought he was the problem. They were wrong. In every wealthy neighborhood, there is a house nobody wants. In Maplerest Estates, that house sat at 4 Birchwood Lane, a forgotten scar on an otherwise immaculate street. The paint had given up years ago, peeling away in long strips that curled like dead leaves. The roof sagged on the left side, as though the house itself was tired of standing. The yard had gone wild, weeds pushing through cracks in the walkway, tall grass swaying against the rusted mailbox that no longer closed properly. Everything else on Birchwood Lane gleamed. Lawns were trimmed to exactly 2 inches. Fences stood white and straight. Garbage cans disappeared into garages before 8 every morning. This was a neighborhood that believed in order, and the man who maintained that order was Richard Hale. He had built Maplerest Estates 20 years ago through his company Hale & Associates, transforming what had once been a mixed-income stretch of modest family homes into a gated paradise for the upper middle class. Richard served as president of the Homeowners Association, not because anyone had challenged him for the position, but because no one ever thought to. He spoke softly, dressed well, shook hands firmly, and had a way of making rules feel like favors. His wife Margaret handled the rest. She knew everything about everyone, and she made sure everyone knew she knew. So when the old pickup truck pulled up to 4 Birchwood Lane on a Tuesday afternoon in September, Margaret was the first to see it. She stood at her kitchen window, coffee growing cold in her hand, watching a tall black man step out of the driver's side. He was lean somewhere in his late 30s, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and work boots. His face carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep could not fix, the kind that settled into the bones and stayed. But his eyes moved with purpose. He scanned the row of pristine houses on either side of the street, not with the nervousness of someone who felt out of place, but with the quiet focus of someone who already knew exactly where he was. His name was Daniel Carter. From the back seat, a small girl climbed out, clutching a wooden box against her chest with both arms. She was 7 years old, with braided hair and large, watchful eyes that absorbed everything without giving anything back. The box was old, its edges worn smooth, its lid carved with a pattern of wildflowers. The craftsmanship was rough, clearly done by hand, but every cut had been made with care. The girl Lily looked up at the house. She studied it the way someone studies a photograph they have seen many times before. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "It looks just like Mom's drawings." Daniel said nothing. He placed one hand on her shoulder, picked up a cardboard box with the other, and walked toward the front door. Within 15 minutes, Margaret had made 3 phone calls. She did not need to say much. The neighbors who received those calls simply looked out their windows, and their faces said the rest. Only one person crossed the street. Ellen Park, a 45-year-old woman who lived 3 houses down, carried a foil-wrapped casserole dish to Daniel's front door. She knocked twice. Daniel opened the door just enough to see her, thanked her politely, and told her they were fine. Not rude, not cold, but clear he did not want anyone stepping inside. Ellen walked back to her house, glancing over her shoulder once. She noticed something the others had missed. Daniel had paid no attention to the crumbling exterior of the house. He had walked straight in as though the outside did not matter at all. Word spread quickly that Daniel had paid cash for the property. The real estate agent who handled the sale mentioned it at a neighborhood dinner party casually, the way people share information they know will travel. No mortgage, no loan application, no financing. He had simply written a check and taken the keys. For a house that had sat on the market for over a year, it was the fastest closing anyone could remember. The question floated through Maplecrest like smoke. If he had that kind of money, why did he choose the worst house on the street? Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel did not repair the roof. He did not paint the exterior. He did not replace the broken porch railing or pull the weeds from the cracked walkway. Instead, he bought construction materials, drywall tools, scrapers, drop cloths, work lights, and carried every piece inside. The front door stayed closed. The curtains stayed drawn. But at night, the house came alive. Lights burned past midnight, sometimes past 2 in the morning. Sounds drifted through the walls, the careful scraping of plaster, the slow prying of wooden panels, the occasional tap of a hammer, always measured, never hurried. Daniel was not demolishing the house. He was excavating it. Layer by layer, he stripped away the surface. New drywall came down to reveal old wallpaper. Old wallpaper peeled back to expose decades-old paint. And beneath the paint on the original brick and plaster, something else appeared, marks made in watercolor directly on the walls. Small drawings, flowers, stars, a sun with a crooked smile. Someone had painted on these walls a very long time ago, and Daniel was bringing those paintings back to light. Lily watched her father work each evening. She sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, the wooden box resting in her lap, its lid open. Inside were folded sheets of paper letters written in careful handwriting and small watercolor sketches. She would hold a sketch up, then look at the wall, comparing what was on the paper to what was slowly appearing beneath the plaster. One night, Daniel uncovered a section of wall near the hallway, and there it was. A wildflower painted in blue and yellow, no larger than a child's hand. The brushstrokes were uneven, joyful, obviously made by someone very young. Lily stood up. She walked to the wall and placed her fingertips on the petals. "Dad," she said quietly, "Mom painted this one when she was my age, right?" Daniel set down his scraper. He looked at his daughter's small hand resting on a flower his wife had painted 30 years ago. His eyes reddened, but he did not cry. "That's right, baby." Lily nodded as though confirming something she had already believed for a long time. Then she sat back down, closed the box, and held it tight. Meanwhile, Margaret Hale's phone had not stopped ringing. The narrative she constructed required no evidence, only suspicion. "He works inside that house every night. Why doesn't he ever open the doors? What is he hiding in there?" One neighbor, emboldened by the collective unease, called the police to report a noise complaint. But everyone understood what the call was really about: a black man living alone with a child in a neighborhood where no one looked like him. 2 officers arrived at 9 in the evening. Daniel opened the door calmly. He showed them his deed of ownership, his identification, and his daughter doing homework at the kitchen table. The officers found nothing wrong and left within 10 minutes. But the damage was already done. A police car parked in front of 4 Birchwood Lane lights, reflecting off the neighbor's pristine windows. That image in a neighborhood like this was a verdict all by itself. The smaller cruelties followed. At the grocery store near Maplecrest, Lily stood in the toy aisle examining a box of colored pencils. Daniel was 1 aisle over picking out bread. A woman from the neighborhood, someone who had signed up for Margaret's group text chain, spotted Lily alone and approached her. "Sweetie, where are your parents? Are you lost?" 3 white children stood in the same aisle unsupervised, and no one asked them a thing. Lily looked up at the woman with an expression far older than 7. "My dad is right there." She pointed to the next aisle, turned away, and went back to studying the colored pencils. 30 days after Daniel moved in, Richard Hale arrived at 4 Birchwood Lane in person. He wore a pressed polo shirt and carried a manila folder thick with documents. His smile was practiced, warm enough to seem friendly, firm enough to communicate authority. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, extending his hand, "we're thrilled to have a new member in the community, but I'm sure you understand Maplecrest has standards. We all do our part." He handed Daniel the folder. Inside, a formal warning letter listing 7 HOA violations: unmowed lawn, peeling exterior paint, damaged roof tiles, improperly stored garbage cans. The list continued. Daniel had 30 days to comply or face financial penalties and legal proceedings. Daniel took the folder without opening it. He looked at Richard, not with anger, not with fear, but with the steady recognition of someone seeing exactly what he expected to see. "I understand, Mr. Hale. Thank you for stopping by." Richard nodded satisfied and walked back down the cracked pathway to his Mercedes parked at the curb. He did not look back. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched him go. When the Mercedes turned the corner, Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled to a folder he had saved months before the move. Inside were scanned documents, a property sale agreement dated 20 years earlier bearing the letterhead of Hale and Associates, a valuation report that priced the home at a fraction of its market worth, and correspondence between Richard's attorney and an elderly homeowner whose grasp of complex legal English had been at best limited. Daniel had known who Richard Hale was long before he bought the house. He closed the phone, stepped inside, and locked the door. That night, after Lily fell asleep with the wooden box tucked under her arm, Daniel sat alone in the half-stripped living room surrounded by ghosts of watercolor flowers. He closed his eyes and the memory arrived the way it always did, uninvited and unstoppable. Maya lying in the hospital bed. Her body thin, her hair gone from the treatments, but her eyes still bright, still the eyes of the girl who had once painted wildflowers on her bedroom wall. She held Daniel's hand, and her grip was stronger than her body had any right to allow. "I grew up in that house, Daniel. I painted my first flower on the wall when I was 6. My father built the bookshelf in the living room. With his own hands, spent 3 weekends on it, sanding every edge so I wouldn't get splinters." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "Then they took it. Daddy signed the papers because he couldn't understand all the legal language. He came home and cried. He thought it was his fault. He carried that shame until the day he died." She reached beside her pillow and pulled out the wooden box, the same one Lily now carried everywhere. She placed it in Daniel's hands. "Everything I remember about that house is in here. The letters, the drawings, it's all for Lily." Her eyes locked onto his. "If you ever can, Daniel, bring her there. Let her see where her mother grew up. Let her know that our family didn't lose. We were stolen from." She did not finish the sentence she started next. Daniel held the box, and he nodded, and he made a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost. Now, sitting in the living room of that same house, Daniel understood the cost. Richard Hale and his HOA wanted him gone. The neighbors watched his every move. The police had already been to his door, and somewhere beneath the floorboards and behind the walls, the evidence of what had been done to Maya's family still waited to be found. He had a choice. He could repair the outside, satisfy the HOA, keep his head down, and quietly finish his work over months, maybe years. Or he could ignore the noise, focus on what mattered, and accept whatever came next. Daniel picked up his scraper, walked to the next section of wall, and began to work. He chose silence. Not because he had nothing to say, but because when the time came to speak, he wanted every word to count. Silence in Maplerest Estates was never really silence. It was the sound of people talking about you in rooms you were not invited into. 3 weeks after Richard Hale delivered his warning, Margaret organized a gathering at her home wine cheese and a printed agenda she had titled Community Safety and Standards. Every household on Birchwood Lane received an invitation. Every household except one. The living room of the Hale residence was large enough to hold 30 people comfortably, and that evening, 28 showed up. Margaret stood at the front, her reading glasses low on her nose, her voice measured and deliberate. She never once said Daniel's name. She did not need to. Every sentence she spoke pointed in the same direction. "We've all noticed increased activity at one of our properties," she began. "Unusual hours, unfamiliar vehicles. We've already had law enforcement at that address. I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm simply saying that in a community like ours, awareness is protection." She proposed 2 new security cameras, one mounted on the streetlight directly across from 4 Birchwood Lane, the other on the fence post of the neighboring property. Both would face Daniel's front door and driveway. The vote passed with 26 in favor. Ellen Park voted against it. One other household abstained. The cameras went up the following Monday. 2 dark lenses mounted high pointed like accusations at Daniel's front porch. Daniel noticed them the morning they appeared. He stood at his window, coffee in hand, studying the new additions to the landscape. He did not complain. He did not call anyone. From that day forward, he simply used the back door. The rumors, meanwhile, had taken on a life of their own. What had started as curiosity had curdled into something darker. At a book club meeting 3 streets over, someone wondered aloud whether Daniel's cash purchase might involve money that could not be traced through a bank. At the elementary school pickup line, a mother asked another within earshot of 2 others whether anyone had verified that Lily was actually enrolled through proper channels or if Daniel had simply shown up with her one day. And on Margaret's group text chain, the messages had grown bolder. Has anyone else noticed he never has visitors? No family, no friends? Who moves to a new town and knows absolutely no one? Each rumor wore a mask of concern. Beneath every mask was the same unspoken logic. A black man who did not explain himself was by definition suspicious. Daniel heard fragments of these conversations the way wind carries sound over a fence, incomplete, distorted but unmistakable in meaning. He let them pass. He had lived in America long enough to recognize the particular tone people used when they wanted to say something ugly without technically saying it. His work inside the house continued every night. By early November, he had uncovered most of the original walls in the hallway, the living room and the bedroom that had once been Maya's. The watercolor paintings appeared like fragments of a lost language. A row of daisies near the baseboard, a lopsided butterfly above the window initials scratched into the doorframe of the bedroom MJ Maya Johnson before she became Maya Carter. But Daniel was searching for something more than paintings. Maya had told him in one of her clearer moments near the end that her father had kept important papers hidden in the house documents he did not trust to a filing cabinet, because filing cabinets could be emptied by lawyers. The old man had tucked them somewhere inside the walls or floors the way his generation often did, believing that a house would protect what a system would not. On a Thursday night in November, Daniel found it. He had been working beneath the staircase, prying up a section of the original hardwood floor that did not sit flush with the rest. Beneath the loose boards, wedged between 2 joists, was a tin box. It was the size of a shoebox, rusted along the edges, sealed with electrical tape that had gone brittle with age. Inside were documents, the original deed to the property signed by Marcus Johnson Maya's father in 1968, a property appraisal conducted by an independent firm in 2003 valuing the home at $234,000, and beside it a second appraisal, this one ordered by Hale and Associates, dated just 2 weeks later, valuing the same property at $28,000. The 2 numbers were so far apart that no honest explanation could bridge the gap. There was more. A letter from Richard Hale's attorney to Marcus Johnson, written in dense legal language, warning of code violations and potential condemnation proceedings if the property was not brought up to standards that would have cost more than the house was allegedly worth. And at the bottom of the stack, the sales agreement itself signed by Marcus Johnson, in a shaky hand selling the family home to Hale and Associates for $28,500. Daniel photographed every page. Then he placed the documents back in the tin box, sealed it, and returned it beneath the floorboards. He did not call a lawyer that night. He did not call anyone. He sat on the stairs in the dark, holding his phone, looking at the photographs of papers that proved what Maya had always known: her family had not failed. They had been cheated, systematically, deliberately, by the same man who now wanted Daniel gone. The next morning, Daniel mowed the front lawn for the first time. He repainted the front door frame, He took the trash cans to the curb at exactly the right time, not because he had surrendered, but because he needed the clock to keep ticking without Richard Hale pressing the accelerator. As the weeks passed, Ellen Park found herself watching 4 Birchwood Lane with different eyes than her neighbors. She noticed what no one else bothered to notice, or what they deliberately ignored. Every morning at 7:45, Daniel walked Lily to the bus stop at the end of the street. Lily's clothes were clean and pressed. Her backpack was zipped. Her hair was freshly braided. At 3:15, Daniel was at the same spot waiting. He never missed a single day. Ellen saw this because her kitchen window faced the bus stop, and she had been watching without meaning to the way people sometimes watch things that quietly contradict the story they have been told. One Saturday afternoon in late November, Ellen was carrying groceries from her car when she saw Daniel unloading a heavy piece of reclaimed wood from his truck bed. It was long and awkward, and he was struggling to angle it through the back gate alone. Ellen set her bags on her porch and walked over. She did not ask permission. She simply grabbed the other end of the board and helped him guide it through the gate and up the back steps. Daniel looked at her, surprised, cautious but not hostile. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do that." Ellen shrugged. "It was going to fall on your foot. Figured I'd save you the trip to the emergency room." Neither of them smiled exactly. But something shifted a crack in the wall Daniel had built between himself and Maplerest, thin as a hairline fracture, but real. A few days later, Ellen noticed Lily sitting on the front steps after school, the wooden box open in her lap. Ellen was walking her dog a route that took her past number 4 every afternoon. She slowed just enough to glance at what Lily was holding, and she saw it. A small watercolor sketch on aged paper depicting a house. The details were specific: a wide porch, a tree in the yard, a window with a yellow curtain. And in the bottom corner, written in a child's handwriting, "My house, Maya, age 8. Ellen kept walking, but her mind did not move on. The name on the drawing, the house in the sketch, the man who worked inside those walls every night like he was trying to find something buried there. That evening, Ellen sat at her laptop and opened the county's public property records database. She typed in the address 4 Birchwood Lane, Maplerest. The ownership history loaded in seconds. The current owner was listed as Daniel Carter, purchased 3 months ago. Before that, the property had been held by Hale and Associates since 2004. And before Hale and Associates, the owner was listed as the Johnson Family Trust. Ellen searched further. She pulled up the transaction details from 2004. The sale price was listed as $28,500. She then cross-referenced the property's assessed tax value for that same year, $219,000. The discrepancy was staggering. Ellen searched for other transactions by Hale and Associates during the same period. Between 2003 and 2006, Richard's company had acquired 8 residential properties in the area that would become Maplerest Estates. Every single one had been purchased from families of color, Black and Latino homeowners at prices that ranged from 8 to 15% of assessed market value. Every transaction followed the same pattern: a lowball appraisal, a letter threatening code violations, and a quick sale before the homeowners could seek outside counsel. Ellen printed everything. 12 pages. She placed them in a folder and set the folder on her kitchen table where it sat for 3 days while she decided what to do with it. During those same weeks, something was changing inside the house at 4 Birchwood Lane that no one in Maplerest could see. Daniel had finished uncovering the walls in Maya's old bedroom. Every painting she had made as a child was now visible, a field of wildflowers that stretched across an entire wall, a night sky with stars that did not follow any real constellation, a self-portrait of a girl with big eyes and bigger dreams. And in the living room, the bookshelf that Maya's father had built by hand was still standing behind the false wall Daniel had removed. The wood was dusty, but solid. 3 weekends of sanding, Maya had said. Every edge smooth, so she would not get splinters. Daniel ran his hand along the top shelf. The wood was still smooth. He thought of Maya, not in the hospital this time, but a year before that, when she was still strong enough to sit at the kitchen table and write. It was a Sunday morning. Lily was asleep in the next room. Maya had a stack of stationery in front of her and a pen in her hand writing letters she would never mail. Daniel had watched her from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. After a while, Maya spoke without turning around. "I'm not angry at them for taking the house, Daniel." Her pen kept moving across the page. "I'm angry because they made my father feel stupid. He signed those papers and came home and wept. He thought he'd failed us. He spent the rest of his life believing he was the one who lost our home." She set the pen down and turned to face him. "He didn't lose it, Daniel. What happened to our family wasn't failure. It was theft, and I need Lily to understand the difference." That conversation had planted the seed. Everything that followed, the research, the savings, the plan to buy back the house, the move to Maplerest, had grown from that single moment at the kitchen table. And now Richard Hale was beginning to feel something he had not felt in 20 years' doubt. It arrived as a phone call from his attorney, who had heard from a clerk at the county records office that someone had been pulling old property transaction files tied to Hale and Associates. The search queries were specific Maplerest 2003 through 2006. Richard could not identify who was looking, but the timing made his eyes drift toward the window, toward the one house on the street that did not match the others. He told Margaret that evening. She dismissed it. "Probably a reporter doing a fluff piece on suburban development. Don't be paranoid." But Richard had not built his fortune by ignoring patterns. He decided to accelerate the HOA proceedings against Daniel. Within a week, the situation escalated sharply. Richard's attorney filed a formal complaint with the county court requesting an injunction to compel Daniel to bring the property into compliance or face forced sale. Simultaneously, Margaret circulated a petition among the residents framed as a request for enhanced community standards enforcement. 32 out of 35 households signed. Ellen did not. 2 others could not be reached. Daniel received the court filing on a Wednesday. He read it standing in his kitchen, Lily eating cereal at the table beside him. He folded the papers, slid them into a drawer, and poured himself more coffee. His face betrayed nothing, but his jaw was tight in a way it had not been before. The confrontation on the street came 3 days later. Daniel was walking with Lily after picking her up from the bus stop when a group of 5 neighbors, 3 men, 2 women, none of them smiling, stepped into their path. The encounter was not violent. It was worse than that. It was polite. A man named Greg Palmer, who lived at number 12, spoke first. "Mr. Carter, we just want to understand. If you've got nothing to hide, why not let us see what you're doing in there? Open the door, give us a tour. Clear the air." Daniel looked at the group, then at Lily, who stood close to his side holding her box. He spoke evenly. "I'm renovating my house. Inside my house. I don't owe anyone here an explanation for what I do in my own home." A woman at the back of the group muttered just loud enough for the words to travel, "This neighborhood used to be so peaceful." Daniel heard it. Lily heard it. They walked past the group without another word, but Lily's grip on the wooden box tightened until her knuckles paled. The next day, Daniel received a phone call from Lily's teacher at Maplerest Elementary, a woman named Mrs. Hanson, who had taught 2nd grade for 11 years and had seen enough to know the difference between a child in trouble and a child who was simply different. Her voice was careful but direct. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know that a parent has requested that the school conduct a welfare check on Lily. They've raised concerns about her behavior, specifically that she carries a box with her everywhere and seems withdrawn." Mrs. Hanson let the words settle before continuing. "I want to be clear, I see no issues with Lily whatsoever. She's attentive, her work is excellent, and she interacts well with her classmates. But I thought you should hear this from me rather than from a formal letter." Daniel thanked her. His voice was steady, but after he ended the call, he stood motionless in the hallway for a long time, staring at the wildflower Maya had painted near the front door. The outside pressure, the cameras, the petition, the lawsuit, all of that he could absorb. But this was different. They had reached toward his daughter. and that was a line he had drawn long before Maplecrest. The wooden box met its crisis on a Friday afternoon. Lily had carried it to school as she always did, tucked inside her backpack with the flap left open so she could reach in and touch the lid during class. At recess, 3 children from her grade kids who had heard their parents talk at kitchen tables about the strange man at number 4 circled her near the swings. "What's in the box?" one of them demanded. "Your dad hides stuff in your house. Is he hiding stuff in there too?" Lily held the box tighter. Another child grabbed at the lid. In the struggle, the box slipped from Lily's hands and hit the asphalt. The clasp broke. The lid flew open. Letters and small watercolor paintings scattered across the playground like leaves caught in a sudden wind. Lily did not scream. She did not cry. She dropped to her knees and began picking up each piece of paper one by one, carefully brushing off the dirt, checking the corners for tears. A teacher arrived within moments, dispersing the other children and kneeling beside Lily to help. But Lily did not want help. She collected every letter, every sketch, every fragment of her mother's handwriting, and placed them back inside the box. She held the broken lid shut with both hands and carried it to a bench at the edge of the schoolyard where she sat alone until Daniel arrived. When Daniel saw the broken clasp, he did not ask what happened. He already knew not the specifics, but the shape of it. He took the box, gently examined the hinge, and told Lily he would fix it that night. She nodded and climbed into the truck without speaking. That evening, Daniel repaired the clasp with a small brass hinge from his toolbox. Lily watched him work the letters and paintings spread across the kitchen table between them. When he finished, he handed the box back. Lily opened it, checked that every piece was inside, and closed it with a soft click. "They wanted to see what was in it," she said. Daniel knelt in front of her. "And now they've seen, but they don't understand it. That's not your problem, Lily. The people who love you, they understand." Lily looked at the box. "Mom would be mad about the broken part." Daniel shook his head. "Your mom would be proud that you picked up every single piece." The court date was set for early December, a preliminary hearing to review the HOA's injunction. Richard Hale's attorney had prepared a thick file of violations photographs and signed statements from neighbors. It was by all appearances an open and shut case. But the evening before the hearing, someone knocked on Daniel's back door. It was Ellen Park, wearing a heavy coat against the December cold, holding a manila folder that looked remarkably similar to the one Richard Hale had handed Daniel weeks earlier. But the contents were very different. Ellen held out the folder. "I've been looking into the history of your house. The property records are public." She spoke quickly, the words tumbling out as though she had rehearsed them on the walk over. "Your house was sold to Hale and Associates in 2004 for $28,500. The assessed value that year was over $200,000. And it wasn't just your house 8 families, all of them Black or Latino, all sold at a fraction of what their homes were worth, all to the same company." Daniel took the folder. He opened it slowly, scanning the pages, though he already knew most of what was written there. Then he looked at Ellen. Really looked at her for the first time since the day she had brought that casserole to his front door. "Would you like to come inside?" he said. It was the first time he had invited anyone into 4 Birchwood Lane. Ellen stepped through the back door and into the hallway. She stopped almost immediately. The walls were bare, not bare as in empty, but bare as in exposed. Stripped down to the original surface where watercolor paintings covered nearly every visible space. Flowers, stars, animals, a sunrise that stretched from one end of the hallway to the other, and on the door frame of the first bedroom scratched into the wood in a child's hand, MJ. Ellen's eyes moved to the living room where a handmade wooden bookshelf stood against the far wall, its surface freshly cleaned and polished, the grain of the wood glowing warm under the work lights. Daniel stood behind her, watching her take it all in. Then he spoke quietly, the way a man speaks when he has carried something alone for too long and is finally ready to set it down. Maya Johnson was my wife. She grew up in this house. She painted these walls when she was 6, 7, 8 years old. Her father built that bookshelf. He pointed to the shelf without looking at it. They lost this house because a man named Richard Hale sent lawyers after a family that couldn't fight back. Maya carried that wound her entire life. Before she died, she asked me to bring Lily here, to show our daughter where her mother came from, and to make sure Lily understood that her family was not a failure, they were robbed. He opened the kitchen drawer and took out the photographs he had taken of the documents from the tin box beneath the stairs. He laid them beside Ellen's folder on the table. 2 separate sets of evidence collected by 2 different people telling the same story. Ellen looked at the papers then, at the painted walls, then at the small bedroom where Maya Johnson had once been a girl who drew flowers because she wanted her house to always feel like spring. Her vision blurred. Daniel stared at the documents spread between them. I have enough to prove what happened to Maya's family. You found the pattern 8 families, but a newspaper won't run a story based on property records and old contracts alone. They'll need people, families willing to say what happened to them. And I don't know if anyone will come forward after 20 years. The weight of that uncertainty filled the kitchen. Daniel had spent months planning, saving, moving, excavating. He had found the evidence. He had kept his promise to Maya. But the final step, the one that would make any of it matter beyond these walls, required something he could not do alone. Ellen picked up her folder and straightened the pages. "Then we find them," she said. "Every family on this list. We knock on their doors, and we ask." Daniel studied her face, searching for the hesitation that should have been there, the reluctance of someone who lived in Maplerest, whose neighbors signed petitions and installed cameras and called the police on a man for the crime of being quiet. He did not find it. He nodded once. And for the first time since moving to Birchwood Lane, Daniel Carter was not alone. They started with the names on Ellen's list. 8 families. 8 addresses scattered across the county, families that had once lived on the land that became Maplerest Estates before Hale and Associates erased their homes and built a neighborhood designed to forget they had ever existed. The hearing had been postponed, a scheduling conflict that bought Daniel and Ellen time neither of them had expected. They began on a Saturday morning in mid-December, 2 days after the postponement. Ellen drove. Daniel sat in the passenger seat with a folder of property records on his lap and a phone full of photographs he had taken beneath his own staircase. The first door they knocked on belonged to a retired postal worker named James Whitfield, who had sold his family's home to Hale and Associates in 2003. He listened to Daniel's explanation from behind a screen door, arms folded, his face unreadable. When Daniel finished, James shook his head slowly. "I've spent 20 years trying to forget that deal. You're asking me to remember it out loud." Daniel did not push. He left his phone number and walked back to the car. The second family, the Delaney's, had moved out of state. A forwarding address led to a voicemail that was never returned. The third family said yes before Daniel finished his second sentence. Rosa Gutierrez, 71 years old, still had the original paperwork in a filing cabinet in her garage. She had kept it all these years, not because she thought she would ever use it, but because throwing it away would have felt like agreeing with what had been done. "I always knew somebody would come asking," she told Ellen at her kitchen table. "I just didn't think it would take this long." By the end of the following week, 5 of the 8 families had agreed to share their stories. The details were different in each home, different kitchens, different faces, different years. But the wound was always the same. Rosa Gutierrez described a man in a suit who came to her mother's door 3 times in 1 week, each visit more urgent than the last, telling her she would lose everything if she did not sell immediately. Another family recalled being promised relocation help that never materialized, a phone number that stopped working the day after the contract was signed. An elderly couple still kept the letter that had threatened them with condemnation, the legal language so dense that they had believed their home would be seized by the government if they did not comply. The final piece came from the Whitfield family. James had called Daniel back 3 days after their first visit. His voice was rough, as though the words had been sitting in his throat for 2 decades. "My father recorded one of the phone calls with Hale's lawyer," he said. "He didn't trust them, so he held a tape recorder up to the phone. It's not great quality, but you can hear enough." On the recording, Richard Hale's attorney spoke to James's elderly father with the calm precision of a man who had delivered the same threat many times before. "If you don't sign today, the legal costs alone will take the house from you, and you won't see a penny." Daniel did not take this evidence to a lawyer. He had studied enough cases like this to know that real estate fraud from 20 years ago, even with documentation, rarely led to criminal charges. The statute of limitations had long passed for most offenses. Courts moved slowly, and powerful men like Richard Hale had the resources to drag proceedings out for years. Instead, Daniel contacted a journalist. Her name was Catherine Mercer, an investigative reporter at the county's largest newspaper, known for her work covering housing discrimination and predatory development practices. Daniel sent her everything: the tin box documents, Ellen's property records, the testimonies from 5 families, and the audio recording. Catherine spent 4 days verifying the information independently. Then she called Daniel back and told him the story would run the following Monday. The preliminary court hearing arrived on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was small, designed for civil disputes, noise complaints, contract disagreements, zoning violations. Richard Hale sat behind the plaintiff's table, flanked by his attorney, a stack of files arranged neatly in front of him. He wore a charcoal suit and the same practiced smile he had worn the day he delivered the HOA warning to Daniel's door. Several Maplerest neighbors had come to watch from the gallery, most of them expecting a swift resolution. Daniel arrived alone. No attorney, no witnesses. He carried a single folder and took his seat at the defendant's table without looking at anyone. The HOA's attorney presented the case efficiently: 7 documented violations photographs of the property's exterior, a timeline of warnings ignored, and the signed petition from 32 residents requesting enforcement. He asked the court to compel Daniel to bring the property into compliance within 60 days, or authorize a forced sale. When the judge asked Daniel if he wished to respond, he stood. "Your Honor, I don't dispute any of the violations," Daniel said. His voice was steady, unhurried, carrying the weight of a man who had waited months for this moment. "The lawn was not mowed on time. The paint is peeling. The roof needs work. All of that is true." He let the admission settle over the room. Richard Hale leaned back slightly in his chair, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Then Daniel opened his folder. "But before this court makes its decision, I'd like to ask Mr. Hale a question." Daniel turned to face Richard directly. "Do you remember the Johnson family, Mr. Hale? They lived at 4 Birchwood Lane before your company bought the land. Marcus Johnson signed a sales agreement with Hale and Associates, selling his family's home for $28,500. An independent appraisal conducted the same year valued that home at over $230,000. The courtroom went still. Richard's attorney started to object, but Daniel continued his tone, never rising above the level of a man stating facts he had memorized long ago. "My wife was Maya Johnson Carter, Marcus Johnson's daughter. She grew up in that house. She painted on the walls. She watched her father build furniture in the living room that is still standing today. Your company took that home from her family using inflated code violation threats and a fraudulent appraisal. And hers was not the only family. Between 2003 and 2006, Hale and Associates acquired 8 properties from Black and Latino homeowners using the same method. Every sale was below 15% of market value." Daniel placed the folder on the table. "I'm not asking this court to rule on any of that today, but I want it on the record. And Mr. Hale should know that the county newspaper will be publishing a full investigation into these transactions on Monday. 5 of the affected families have provided statements. There is a recorded phone call in which your attorney threatened a 70-year-old man into signing away his home." Richard Hale's face had gone pale. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Richard did not respond. He sat motionless, staring at the folder on Daniel's table as though it contained something far more dangerous than paper. The judge adjourned the hearing without ruling, requesting additional time to review the new information. Daniel gathered his folder, walked out of the courtroom, and drove home to fix dinner for his daughter. The article ran the following Monday exactly as Catherine Mercer had promised. It was thorough, detailed, and devastating. 5 families named and quoted. Property records side by side. The audio recording transcribed in full. A photograph of 4 Birchwood Lane. The house that had started it all appeared above the headline. The reaction extended far beyond Maplecrest. The city council announced a formal review of Hale and Associates' development practices. Richard Hale resigned from the Homeowners Association within 48 hours. His attorney withdrew from the HOA case against Daniel. Margaret Hale, who had spent months managing the neighborhood's opinion of Daniel Carter, stopped answering her phone. No one went to prison. Daniel had never expected anyone would. But with the city council investigation looming and public pressure mounting, Hale and Associates entered into a civil settlement with the affected families rather than face a prolonged legal battle that would unearth even more. The settlement included financial compensation and, more importantly, a formal acknowledgement that the transactions had been conducted under predatory conditions. The families who had spent 20 years believing they had been foolish or weak or simply unlucky were finally told what Maya Johnson Carter had always known they had been stolen from. Maplecrest did not transform overnight. This was not that kind of story. Several neighbors continued to avoid Daniel not out of hostility anymore, but out of the quieter discomfort of people who had signed a petition and installed cameras and called the police, and who now had to live with the knowledge of what those actions looked like in the light of the truth. Some would never apologize. Some would never change. That was the cost of being right in a place that had built its identity on looking away. But others came around slowly in the small ways that mattered. Ellen was first, as she had been from the beginning. Then a few more, a wave from the driveway, a package accepted at the door, a brief conversation at the mailbox that did not feel like surveillance. One morning in late January, Daniel opened his front door and found a clay pot sitting on the porch. Inside it, a cluster of wildflowers, purple and yellow, still holding against the winter cold. There was no note, no name. Just the flowers left by someone who had decided that shame was heavier than silence. Lily saw the pot when she came downstairs for breakfast. She looked at the flowers, then at her father, and she smiled. Not the cautious half-smile she had worn since arriving at Maplecrest, but something open and unguarded, the kind of expression that belongs to a child who has finally stopped bracing for the next bad thing. Daniel finished the interior of the house by early February. Every wall that Maya had painted on was preserved: the wildflower field in the bedroom, the lopsided butterfly above the window, the sunrise that stretched across the hallway. The bookshelf her father had built stood in the living room, polished and whole, holding a row of Lily's school books, and a small framed photograph of Maya, at 8 years old, standing in front of the very same house, grinning at a camera held by someone who loved her. The exterior Daniel repaired on his own terms. He fixed the roof, replaced the porch railing, and mowed the lawn to a reasonable height. But the front door he painted yellow, the color Maya had once described as the color of morning light inside their house when she was a girl. It did not match any other door on Birchwood Lane. It was not supposed to. On a Sunday afternoon, Lily sat on the floor of her bedroom, the room that had once been Maya's, and opened the wooden box. She lifted out the letters and the watercolor sketches one by one and taped them to the wall beside the flowers her mother had painted 30 years before. The last letter, the one Maya had written about the house, about her father's bookshelf, about the flowers that kept spring alive inside the walls Lily placed at the center between a blue wildflower and a yellow star. The box was empty now, but Lily did not put it away. She reached for a sheet of paper and a set of colored pencils, the same ones she had studied at the grocery store months ago, the ones Daniel had quietly bought for her the next day. She drew a picture, a house with a yellow door, a wide porch, and two figures standing out front. One tall, one small. She folded the drawing, placed it inside the box, and closed the lid. The box was no longer a container for grief. It was the beginning of something new. Daniel Carter did not come to Maplerest Estates for revenge. He came to keep a promise he had made to a woman who painted flowers on walls because she wanted her home to carry the feeling of spring even in winter. He came so that their daughter would know where she came from, and that the people she came from had never been small, only silenced. But sometimes the truth itself is the most powerful act of justice. It does not need fists. It does not need fury. It only needs the right person in the right place, willing to say what happened plainly, quietly, and without looking away. And when the truth finally speaks, the walls built on lies do not crumble with a roar. They simply stop standing. And behind them, waiting in the dust and the daylight, there are always flowers that someone planted a long time ago, still alive, still bright, still reaching for the sun. If Daniel's story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you've seen or a truth that deserved to be spoken out loud, we'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever watched someone be underestimated by everyone around them, only to prove them all wrong in the end? And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing because every week we bring you stories of people who chose patience over anger, truth over silence, and love over everything else. We'll see you in the next one.